Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So imagine for a second that you inherit this beloved, legendary institution.
Right, like stepping into the shoes of a giant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are taking over from a visionary founder, a total titan in your community.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. You are taking over while your father, that very founder, is lying in a hospital bed dying of terminal cancer.
Oh, man. That is a heavy burden right out of the gate.
Yeah, and it gets worse. You have, virtually no money in the operational accounts.
Oh, wow.
And sitting at your desk your very first week, you realize the IRS is demanding $8,000 in less than 7 days.
That is terrifying.
Right. I mean, if you don't pay it, the doors close and the people relying on you are just back on the streets.
Yeah, the stakes are literal life and death.
So today, we are looking at what happens when the established, magic formula of a pioneering generation completely fails their successor. We are dropping straight into the friction between our panicked, spreadsheet-driven human timelines and the glacial, often invisible mechanics of divine intervention. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, so that tension is actually the central heartbeat of the source material we are examining today.
Okay.
The book is called God Wears His Own Watch, Glimpses of God and Answered Prayer at Miracle Hill. And it's written by Reid Lehman.
Right.
Our mission in this deep dive is to basically dissect the operational history of a specific, long-standing ministry to the homeless and addicted.
And that's Miracle Hill in South Carolina, right?
Exactly. We want to really understand the architecture of a place where unconventional leadership, profound organizational desperation, and unyielding faith all sort of collide.
Okay, I like that.
And Lehman builds his entire thesis around a concept found in the biblical book of Daniel, chapter 4, verse 35, which essentially dictates that humanity has absolutely no leverage to control how, or crucially, when a prayer is answered.
Yeah, so we're basically dissecting the illusion of control here. Because if you are running a rescue mission today, or, any nonprofit really, you live and die by forecasting.
Oh, absolutely. You need predictability.
Right. You have quarterly goals, capital campaigns mapped out to the month, and donor retention metrics. You want a dashboard that shows you where the funding is, like tracking a package on your phone.
Yeah, you want that certainty. But Lehman's experience suggests that when you step into the arena of profound life or death human desperation, that tracking app just shatters.
Wow.
You are operating completely in the dark. It is the definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
And the author, he doesn't introduce this thesis from a place of comfortable academic hindsight. He forces the reader to start exactly where he started.
Which was in a state of sheer unadulterated terror.
Exactly. So the year is 1985. Reid Lehman is 30 years old.
Okay.
His father, Reid Lehman, the man who built Miracle Hill from the dirt up,
right,
is incapacitated.
Right, he's dying.
Yeah, and Reid was an absolute giant. The text describes him as having a commanding physical presence, snow-white hair, a booming voice.
Like a classic charismatic leader.
Totally. And he had spent decades weaving this really intricate web of relationships with the donors who kept the entire ministry financially afloat.
So Reid was the archetype of the mid-century founder. He walked into a room and people just trusted him with their money.
Right. And then you have Reid. He is 30, but by his own admission in the text, he looks like he's 25.
He's just a kid to these donors.
Yeah. He is incredibly thin. His Adam's apple is prominent. He is visibly dealing with adult acne.
Oh, man.
And his reputation among the staff and board is that of an impatient, somewhat impetuous young man.
Right. He doesn't have the gravitas at all.
He doesn't have the Rolodex of wealthy local businessmen either. And the clock is ticking on that $8,000 tax obligation.
And adjusting for inflation, we are talking about a crippling sum for a grassroots shelter just trying to keep the lights on week to week.
Absolutely. So Reid is entirely isolated. He can't go to the donors because they don't know him.
And they certainly don't trust him yet.
Exactly. And he refuses to go to his dying father because, burdening a man in the final stages of liver cancer with institutional bankruptcy feels monstrous.
Yeah, that would be awful.
So Reid does the only thing he knows how to do. He attempts to replicate his father's spiritual methodology.
Okay, what does he do?
He calls the core staff together for an emergency prayer meeting on a Monday. They lay out the financial reality, they pray fervently for the funds, and they wait.
Okay.
Monday passes. The mail arrives. The envelopes are empty.
Oh, no.
So they hold another desperate meeting on Tuesday. They check the post office box again.
Let me guess. Nothing.
Nothing. Wednesday arrives. The tension is just suffocating. They pray a third time, and the result is absolute deafening silence.
Wow. The psychological crushing weight of that silence must have been just unbearable.
Oh, without a doubt.
Because this isn't just about an unpaid bill, right? This is a profound crisis of identity.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you are a second-generation leader, maybe you took over a team from a beloved mentor, you stepped into a family business, you know this exact flavor of imposter syndrome.
Oh, it's so common.
You look at the established playbook, the one that supposedly produced miracles for the founder, and when you execute the plays, you get 0 yardage.
That's a great way to put it.
Is it common for second-generation leaders to feel like the formula just doesn't work for them?
It is incredibly common. And the author actually anchors this specific psychological terror in a historical and theological parallel.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
He uses the transition of power between the biblical prophets Elijah and Elisha.
Okay, I know that story.
Right, so in the historical text, Elijah is the towering figure, a man who calls down fire and commands the elements. Elisha is just the apprentice.
Yeah.
When Elijah is taken away, his physical cloak falls to the ground. Elisha picks it up, walks alone to the edge of the Jordan River, and faces an immediate physical obstacle.
The river itself.
Right, and he strikes the water with the cloak. But before he does, he shouts this incredibly vulnerable, almost desperate question. He says, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?"
Ah, he is terrified the power left with the mentor.
Precisely. And Reid Lehman, staring down the IRS in 1985, is asking the modern equivalent, "Where is the Lord, the God of Gerald Lehman?"
Wow. Yeah, Elisha couldn't cross the river on his master's lingering momentum.
Right, he had to test the fabric of reality for himself. And Reid is forced to confront the harsh truth of succession.
Which is what?
Institutional memory of past miracles is entirely insufficient when the crisis is at your own doorstep.
You can't outsource your faith to a predecessor.
Exactly. You have to step into the crucible, strike the water yourself, and find out if the foundation holds under your own weight.
Which makes total sense. I want the listener to just think about that for a second. Think about a time you had to step into big shoes. Did you rely on your predecessor's reputation, or did you have to forge your own proof of concept?
It's a huge shift in mindset.
And to truly grasp why Reid was so utterly paralyzed by the fear of dropping this legacy, we have to understand what it took to build that legacy in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. We have to rewind the clock back to the 1950s.
Right, because the modern conception of launching a nonprofit involves, feasibility studies, securing seed funding, hiring a passionate but polished board of directors, and waiting for optimal market conditions.
Yeah, that's the standard playbook today.
But Miracle Hill's origin story violently rejects every single one of those modern best practices.
It really does. The operational philosophy of the founders in the late 1950s was encapsulated in a motto that sounds almost blasphemous to a modern MBA.
What was it?
The motto was, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing poorly until you get a chance to do it better.
Wait, I have to stop you there and push back on that philosophy.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, worth doing poorly sounds like a terrible business strategy.
From a corporate standpoint, sure.
Right, if you are manufacturing software, fine, release a buggy beta version and patch it later. But if you are dealing with vulnerable human beings, chronically homeless men detoxing from severe alcohol addiction, abandoned children doing it poorly, borders on negligence.
I see what you're saying.
Shouldn't a responsible organization wait until they have the proper plumbing, trained psychiatric staff, and sustainable food supply before they take on human lives? Doesn't doing it poorly risk doing catastrophic harm?
Your critique is like the standard logical objection of modern risk management.
Right.
However, the text demands that we look at the historical context of extreme poverty in the rural South during that era.
Okay, paint that picture for me.
The founders were not choosing between doing it poorly and doing it with excellence. They were choosing between doing it poorly and letting people die in a ditch.
Oh, okay, that changes things.
Right. Gerald Lehman originally trained to be a missionary overseas in New Guinea.
Oh, wow.
But instead, he uprooted his wife and young children and moved them into a fundamentally broken 4-room farmhouse in South Carolina.
A farmhouse.
Yeah, and they brought recovering alcoholics into this house to live with them, trying to teach them farming as a method of rehabilitation.
And the physical conditions were just staggering. I mean, the text describes dirt literally falling through the floorboards of this farmhouse.
Yes. The floor was so porous that the chickens living underneath the house would peck upward through the cracks to get the crumbs dropping from the dinner table.
That is wild. We are talking about a level of scarcity that most modern directors simply cannot fathom.
Not at all.
Reid recounts memories of coming home from elementary school, asking his mother for an afternoon snack, and discovering that the only food in the entire house to put between two slices of bread was plain mustard.
Yeah, mustard sandwiches.
Mustard sandwiches. That was the nutritional reality of the founder's family.
And the vulnerability of that existence meant that a single operational hiccup could be fatal.
Like what?
Well, Lehman details an incident where the family was raising a pig, which represented a massive portion of their projected caloric intake for the coming months.
Okay, protein for the winter.
Right. But somehow, this pig fell into the farm's drinking well and drowned.
Wait, a pig? Into the drinking well?
Yes. So in one localized tragedy, they lost their primary meat supply and their only source of uncontaminated drinking water.
That is devastating. I mean, when you are operating with margins that razor thin, waiting for an endowment to clear before you help an alcoholic is an abstract luxury you just cannot afford.
Exactly. They were practicing emergency battlefield triage.
Yeah.
And the people executing this triage were not highly paid executives. The book highlights pioneer staff members, women like May Harlow and Vera Wright.
They were working for what, $10 a week?
$10 a week. They weren't building resumes.
No.
Some of these staff members abandoned fully funded mission trips to Haiti or indefinitely postponed their college educations simply because the bleeding was happening right in front of them.
The text argues they were responding to the tears of God. They settled for immediate action because perfection was just a mirage.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this immediate, desperate action birthed the defining mythological event of the organization.
Oh, the event that literally gave the mission its name.
Yes. So in the late 1950s, the leadership finally scraped together enough resources to construct a proper facility to house children.
Okay.
They selected a site at the top of a steep incline. And the construction relied entirely on volunteer labor, including block masons, who drove hundreds of miles to participate.
Right.
So they reached a critical phase, pouring a massive concrete slab.
No, for anyone who's ever done flat work, pouring a large slab is a point of no return.
Oh, absolutely.
You have a very narrow window before the concrete sets, and it is highly susceptible to the environment.
Exactly the issue. They are mid-pour, the concrete is completely wet and exposed, and a violent, dark thunderstorm rolls over the horizon.
Oh, no.
And in the 1950s, they don't have massive industrial tarps ready to deploy.
No.
They have no financial reserves to buy another truckload of concrete if this slab is ruined by the rain. A heavy downpour will wash the cement cream right out of the aggregate, entirely destroying the structural integrity of the foundation.
Facing total project failure, the workers do something that defies every construction protocol.
Yeah, they literally drop their trowels, stop smoothing the concrete, gather together on the active job site, and pray.
They petition God to manipulate the atmospheric pressure and hold back the storm.
Right. And according to the eyewitness accounts detailed in the text, the volunteers opened their eyes to an astonishing meteorological anomaly.
What happened?
They watched a solid, opaque wall of heavy rain driving straight toward them. But as the storm system hit the property, the clouds physically parted directly over the construction site.
Wow.
The rain battered the surrounding landscape, completely flooding the bottom of the incline, but left the top of the hill where the vulnerable concrete lay completely dry, save for a few stray drops.
That is incredible. And a secretary, Vera Wright, one of those women working for $10 a week, hears about this localized weather event and casually remarks to the staff, "This is just like Miracle Hill, isn't it?"
Yes, and the phrase anchors itself in the organizational consciousness.
Yeah.
It becomes Miracle Hill.
Okay, so you have this incredibly potent foundation of shared suffering, mustard sandwiches, and tangible, physical miracles. It creates a powerful tribal bond.
It does.
But Lehman reveals the dark side of that bond. All that shared trauma, all that isolation from the secular world calcified, it eventually created a massive, impenetrable bubble.
Yeah, a bubble that almost broke the organization later.
Right, and for the organization to survive the coming decades, Reid Lehman actually had to be exiled from it.
Exactly. So the narrative takes a jarring pivot in 1976.
Okay, so Reid is older now.
Right. Reid is now a young man working directly under his father's shadow with the mission. He has married a young woman named Barbara.
Okay.
And their marriage is rapidly disintegrating. The tension is rooted in the unique sociology of a total institution. Barbara is only 20 years old, and they are living in a tiny house located squarely in the middle of the mission campus.
Oh, I can see how that would be tough.
Yeah, she feels like she is living in an ant farm, constantly observed and judged by these spiritual giants who've sacrificed everything.
Right. The pressure on a spouse in that environment is immense. The unspoken expectation is that your family life is entirely subordinate to the needs of the ministry.
Exactly. Barbara feels that Reid prioritizes his public reputation among the staff over his covenant with her. She is just suffocating.
So what does Reid do?
So Reid calls a meeting with his father, Gerald the Patriarch, who literally starved to build this place.
That had to be an intimidating meeting.
Oh, yeah. They sit down, both men weeping, and Reid confesses that his marriage is in constant destructive conflict. He tells his dad he has to resign.
Now, I have to say, one might expect a founder of that era to deliver a harsh utilitarian ultimatum.
Right, like the mission comes first.
Exactly. The evangelical subculture often idolizes martyrdom for the cause, even at the expense of the family unit. But Gerald Lehman displays profound emotional intelligence here.
He really does.
Yeah.
He does not demand loyalty to the institution. He tells his son, unequivocally, that his first obligation is to his wife.
Wow.
Gerald blesses the departure, prioritizing the health of Reid's marriage over the succession plan of the ministry.
So Reid leaves the campus. He abandons the spiritual bubble and takes a job managing a retail store for 84 Lumber.
The lumber yard.
He stays there for 3 years. And this period of secular exile is critical to the DNA of the story.
It's essentially his business school.
Right. Reid assumes his career in ministry is permanently over, so he throws himself into the mechanics of retail management. He learns inventory control. He learns how to analyze a profit and loss statement.
And most importantly, he learns how the secular labor market functions.
Right, which is completely different from a mission.
Completely. That last point is crucial, because inside the mission bubble, human resources were managed through the lens of spiritual guilt and sacrifice.
Like, are you dedicated enough to work for $10?
Exactly. At 84 Lumber, Reid learns what is reasonably expected of an employee who was simply there to earn a paycheck.
Okay.
He learns how to hold associates accountable using objective performance metrics rather than questioning their spiritual dedication. He learns the language of efficiency, totally stripped of religious overtones.
He is acquiring the exact operational toolkit required to run a multi-million-dollar organization, and he's getting it from a lumberyard.
Yeah, it's brilliant in hindsight.
So then, in August 1979, the dynamic flips entirely. Barbara, the wife who felt so crushed by the ministry that they had to flee, approaches Reid.
Right.
She tells him she senses it is time to return. Gerald's health is beginning to fail, and Barbara intuitively understands that the secular business acumen Reid has acquired at the lumber company is the missing ingredient Miracle Hill desperately needs to survive the coming decade.
And when Reid returns to the campus in 1980, the 3 years in the secular world have fundamentally altered his perception.
He's seeing it with fresh eyes.
Exactly. He is no longer suffering from institutional blindness. He looks at the organization he grew up in and realizes it has mutated into what he terms a strange monastery.
A strange monastery.
Yeah. The leadership had spent decades aggressively separating themselves from the, quote, sinful secular world, and in doing so, they had completely severed their connection to reality.
Wow.
To external observers, including mainstream churches in the city, Miracle Hill appeared secretive, irrational, and bizarrely insular.
And this lack of external accountability allowed a horrifying blind spot to persist. The book reveals a detail that is genuinely shocking.
Oh, yes.
Up until the year 1980, this deeply sacrificial, Jesus-focused ministry was rigidly racially segregated.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
They refused to house black and white homeless men under the same roof.
It is a devastating indictment of how an echo chamber operates.
Yeah.
I mean, the founders and staff were arguably godly people who genuinely cared for the poor, but they were trapped entirely within the cultural prejudices of the mid-century American South.
How did they justify it?
The leadership justified the segregation by claiming that integrating a shelter for transient, often unstable men would inevitably trigger violent race riots on the property.
Ah, so it's based on fear.
Yeah. They had attempted a separate but equal approach by funding an alternate shelter specifically for African Americans, but it collapsed due to a lack of sustained financial support.
How does an organization read the gospel every morning and completely miss the mandate for racial unity?
It happens because they only talk to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody from the outside was allowed to challenge their operational assumptions.
And the consequences were tangible. Downtown churches in Greenville, South Carolina, were actively boycotting the mission, refusing to send financial support because of the segregation policy. The mission staff lived in dread of local media interviews because reporters would relentlessly interrogate them on their indefensible racial stance.
But Reid's secular detox allowed him to see the absurdity of the situation immediately. He realizes that spiritual fervor does not immunize an organization against profound cultural ignorance.
So what does he do when he gets back?
Upon his return, he initiates a sweeping, uncompromising integration of the staff, the board of directors, and all housing facilities, completing the process by 1984.
And let me guess, the race riots never happened.
The fear of race riots proved entirely unfounded. The segregation was a phantom menace born of isolation.
Now, I want to zero in on Barbara's role here. I want to highlight her agency in this entire arc.
It's super important.
Reid frankly admits in the text that during their early marital struggles, he routinely dismissed Barbara's concerns because she couldn't articulate her distress in a cold, logical framework.
Right, she couldn't give him a bullet point presentation.
Exactly. He demanded rational, point-by-point arguments, which she couldn't provide. She just knew the environment was toxic.
Yeah.
And Reid later realizes that her intuition was the precise instrument God used to shatter the bubble.
Absolutely.
She forced the exile that gave him the administrative skills, and she triggered the return that ultimately saved the mission's soul regarding segregation.
And Reid's realization of his own arrogance. The assumption that he understood the world perfectly just because he was raised by spiritual giants that profoundly shapes his approach to his own family later on.
Oh, yes. This is where it gets really interesting.
He becomes acutely aware that growing up in proximity to miracles can actually inoculate you against genuine faith.
How so?
Well, you learn the vocabulary of dependency without ever actually feeling the hunger.
Oh, that's good.
So he refuses to let his own sons inherit his blind spots.
He decides that hearing stories about mustard sandwiches isn't enough, right? His children need to feel the terror of the empty pantry. He draws inspiration from Psalm 78, which commands the passing down of praiseworthy deeds to the next generation.
But Reid interprets this not as a storytelling mandate, but as a requirement for experiential learning.
Yeah, he engineers a series of father-son trips that I can only describe as extreme manufactured exposure therapy for faith.
The logistics of these experiments are startling.
Let's talk about them.
So in 1992, Reid decides to take his 13-year-old son, Matt, on the first trip. At this point, their relationship is deeply fractured.
That's normal teenage stuff, or worse.
A bit worse. Reid writes that they are existing in a state of armed truce under the same roof. He frankly admits he doesn't particularly like his son at that moment.
Wow, that is honest.
Very. So Reid stops shaving for 2 weeks to look disheveled. He drives them to Wilmington, North Carolina, parks the car, and leaves everything behind. No cash, no credit cards, no hygiene products. They step onto the pavement with only the clothes they are wearing, Reid's driver's license, and a single crushed packet of crackers Matt smuggled from his lunch.
A pack of crackers.
That's it.
They intentionally become vagrants. They sleep in a local homeless shelter. They stand in line at soup kitchens for their daily calories.
Yeah, Reid secures cash by taking brutal day labor jobs, literally tearing out plaster walls in a dilapidated building just so they can buy a clean change of clothes from a thrift store by the end of the week.
And in this crucible of manufactured poverty, the tension between them evaporates.
It really does.
When the comforts of their middle-class life are stripped away and they are forced to rely on God to provide their next meal through the charity of strangers, their relationship heals. They leave Wilmington as friends.
And because that worked, 2 years later, in 1994, Reid decides to replicate the protocol with his other son, Andy.
Okay.
They target Savannah, Georgia. But Barbara is fiercely opposed to a repeat performance.
I bet she was.
She delivers a chilling warning as they leave. If you come home without our son, we're going to have a real problem.
Good for her.
Reid is so committed to the bit, though, that he intentionally leaves his wallet locked in the car at the airport.
To make sure he can't bail out.
Right. And as they're walking away, he discovers a few stray coins in his pocket. To ensure total financial zero, he places the change on a manhole cover. They arrive in Savannah entirely destitute.
The Savannah trip is physically grueling. They are caught out in torrential rain and forced to hitchhike. They seek refuge in a Salvation Army shelter.
Yeah, they even contract a case of body lice from the contaminated bedding and have to undergo chemical shampoo treatments when they finally return home.
Now, I have to challenge the ethics of this entire endeavor. Taking a teenager onto the streets to play homeless feels dangerously close to poverty tourism.
That's a fair point.
It's poverty cosplay. Real homelessness is characterized by the absence of an exit strategy. Reid knew exactly where his car was parked. He knew the credit card was in the glove box. If his son had a medical emergency, they could bail out in an hour. Is it a genuine exercise of faith if you have a hidden eject button?
That is definitely the most common and stringent critique leveled at these types of immersive experiences. Critics argue it trivializes the trauma of systemic poverty.
Right. How does he defend it?
However, Lehman defends the psychological utility of the exercise by leaning on the Hebrew linguistic concept of the word know or yada. In the biblical framework, to know something is not merely to give intellectual assent to a fact. It requires visceral, personal experience.
So the goal wasn't to understand the macroeconomic causes of homelessness.
Correct. The goal was entirely pedagogical and localized to his son's spiritual formation.
Okay.
He needed them to physically feel the anxiety of not knowing the source of their next meal, even temporarily, so they could authentically experience the relief and gratitude of sudden provision. He was trying to bypass their comfortable suburban neurobiology.
And while the primary goal was father-son bonding, Reid accidentally uncovers a glaring operational failure in the broader rescue mission industry.
Oh, this was a massive revelation for him.
During these trips to Wilmington and Savannah, they interacted with multiple Christian-branded soup kitchens and emergency shelters. Reid, a mission director himself, observed the intake processes critically.
And what did he see?
He realized that across all these different agencies, only one single location, the Salvation Army facility in Savannah, actually initiated a conversation about their spiritual condition.
Wow.
Every other organization handed them a tray of food, pointed them to a cot, and never once mentioned the gospel.
For a leader in the faith-based rescue sector, this was a devastating realization.
Yeah.
Lehman articulates the existential futility of that approach. He writes, "What use is it to serve a man's body, which is, after all, one day going to turn to dust, and not give him the words of eternal life?"
Providing a warm bed to an addict without offering a mechanism to heal the soul is, in Lehman's view, simply making them comfortable on their way to destruction.
And that realization on the streets of Savannah became the cornerstone of Miracle Hill's operational policy. From that moment forward, physical provision and spiritual engagement had to be inextricably linked.
And the vulnerability Reid demanded of his sons on the streets of Savannah perfectly mirrors the terrifying financial vulnerability the organization itself had to navigate.
Absolutely. The scale of the money changes wildly throughout the decades, but the underlying requirement for blind trust remains identical.
We need to look closely at the math behind these financial miracles, starting with the existential crisis of 1966.
Right. So 1966, before Reid's tenure, the mission was being run by a leader referred to as Brother Tom.
Okay.
When Tom exited the organization, he left behind a staggering financial crater, $400,000 in debt.
We have to translate that number for a modern audience. Adjusted for inflation, $400,000 in 1966 is roughly equivalent to $3.5 million today.
It's massive.
But the absolute dollar amount isn't even the most terrifying part. The text notes that this debt was twice the size of their entire annual operating budget.
Yeah, imagine running a corporation that requires $1 million a year to function and discovering you owe the bank $2 million tomorrow. It is complete insolvency.
How do they survive that?
The mechanics of how they survive that deficit reveal the extreme self-sacrifice embedded in the organization's culture. They managed to secure a $100,000 matching pledge from a major donor.
Okay, that's a start.
But to meet that match, the internal staff had to bleed. These were employees making perhaps $75 a month.
Oh, wow.
And month after month, they endorsed their own meager paychecks and handed them right back to the mission's accounting office just to keep the doors from being padlocked by the creditors.
It is an incredible display of loyalty, but it's also a deeply traumatic way to operate a business.
It is. It takes a huge toll.
Fast forward to the 1990s, and under Reid's leadership, the scale of operations has exploded. They are no longer dealing with drafty farmhouses. They need a massive new facility.
Right.
Reid, still carrying the institutional trauma of past debts, approaches the expansion with extreme caution. He proposes a conservative goal. Raise $800,000 to purchase and retrofit an existing used building.
But during a strategic planning committee meeting, a board member interrupts Reid's cautious presentation with a paradigm-shifting question.
What was it?
He asks, if money were not the problem, what is the ideal solution?
Oh, I love that.
That single question forces the leadership to separate their vision from their current bank balance. They abandon the used building concept and design a state-of-the-art $3.3 million facility from the ground up.
A $3.3 million leap of faith.
Yeah.
And the outcome defies standard nonprofit amortization schedules. Within exactly 9 months of cutting the ribbon and moving into that massive new complex, the entire $3.3 million cost is paid off in full, zero debt.
Which is just unheard of. This transition from the doing it poorly mindset of the 1950s to building with a multi-million-dollar excellence required a profound shift in how they understood divine provision.
Right, they learned to wait.
They adopted a rigid, countercultural financial policy. They would wait until the funding was clearly evident before fully committing, ensuring they moved into new infrastructure debt-free.
But the ultimate stress test of this policy and the specific narrative that provides the book its title occurs roughly around the year 2001.
Yes. The Spartanburg Decision.
If the 1966 crisis was about crushing debt, the Spartanburg Decision is a masterclass in the sheer absurdity of faith-based cash flow management.
Completely absurd.
The macroeconomic conditions are terrible. The stock market is slumping. Miracle Hill is running a negative operating cash flow. They are struggling to meet the weekly payroll.
Reid is under immense pressure.
He is carrying the weight of hundreds of employees and thousands of clients. He attends a local church service, desperate for a break, and the pastor preaches a fiery sermon about George Mueller.
And George Mueller, being the famous 19th century British director of orphanages, who notoriously never asked anyone for money, but simply prayed, and saw millions of pounds donated exactly when needed.
Exactly the kind of story that would torture a struggling nonprofit director.
Oh, absolutely.
Reid sits in the pew, tears streaming down his face, and he has a moment of raw, angry honesty with God. He silently demands, "Why won't you do that for us? If you just dropped $500,000 out of the sky right now, I'd know you actually care about me."
He is at the absolute end of his psychological rope.
And in the middle of this agonizing cash flow drought, a proposal lands on the boardroom table.
What's the proposal?
There is an opportunity to open a brand new rescue mission facility in the neighboring city of Spartanburg. Expanding into Spartanburg would add an estimated $30,000 a month to their baseline operating expenses.
$30,000 of new, recurring monthly overhead when they are already bleeding cash.
Right. From a fiduciary standpoint, voting to approve this expansion is borderline malpractice.
The board of directors understands the math perfectly well. They spend a grueling meeting, fasting, praying, and debating the logistics.
And what do they decide?
Well, driven by a collective conviction that the need in Spartanburg requires an immediate response, the board takes a breath and unanimously votes yes.
Wow.
They vote to embrace massive new liabilities while currently insolvent.
The psychological whiplash of what happens next is staggering.
Tell me about it.
The very next day after this unanimous, terrifying vote, the phone rings in the Miracle Hill administrative office. It is a local bank.
Okay.
The bank informs them that a woman named Mrs. Smith had passed away the previous December, coincidentally, the exact time the board had begun intensely praying about the Spartanburg expansion.
Oh, wow.
The bank executive explains that Mrs. Smith's passing has triggered the execution of a trust. Miracle Hill is the primary beneficiary. The payout is $829,000.
That gives me chills.
It is the largest single financial gift the organization had received in its history up to that point. It instantly vaporized their negative cash flow and fully funded the Spartanburg expansion.
But let's look at the temporal mechanics of this. Why is the book titled, God Wears His Own Watch?
Right, because this raises an important question.
Because the timeline of the provision completely dismantles human logic. The trust that disbursed the $829,000 in 2001 was drafted and legally established by Mrs. Smith in the year 1988.
13 years earlier.
13 years before Reid Lehman sat crying in a pew begging for $500,000, the exact sum he needed plus $300,000 more was already locked into a legal document waiting to be deployed.
The supply was secured a decade in advance, but the execution of that supply was withheld until the precise moment the board demonstrated the faith to approve the Spartanburg expansion.
Exactly. The watch is ticking on a completely different temporal plane.
That story is exhilarating, but Lehman makes a severe pivot right after it.
It really does.
He essentially says, look at the $3.3 million building. Look at the $829,000 trust fund. If the addicts sleeping in those beds do not stop drinking, if the violent men do not find peace, if the generational cycles of poverty are not broken, then all of that money, all of that real estate is totally worthless.
Right. The architecture and the endowments are merely the staging ground for the actual work, which is the agonizing nonlinear transformation of the human soul. Lehman introduces a profound theological metaphor to explain the psychology of addiction recovery.
Okay, let's hear it.
He observes that in the biblical narratives, when Jesus healed a blind person, he sometimes did it instantaneously with a single spoken command.
Yeah.
Immediate, clean restoration.
Sure.
But other times, the methodology was bizarrely complex and messy.
He points specifically to the narrative in the Gospel of John, chapter 9.
Yes. Jesus approaches a blind man, spits into the dirt, mixes the saliva and the dust into a muddy poultice, physically rubs this mud onto the man's eyes, and then commands him to navigate his way to a specific pool to wash it off.
It is tactile, it is dirty, it requires the participation of the blind man, and it takes time.
Lehman argues that in the trenches of rescue mission work, spiritual transformation is almost never an instant, clean miracle. It is almost exclusively the mud poultice process.
So it takes time.
Exactly. When a chronically institutionalized person encounters grace, their deeply ingrained neurobiology, their survival mechanisms honed over decades of trauma, does not vanish overnight.
The mud poultice takes decades to work. Look at Les Kimbrell. It is 1962. Les is a hardened 16-year-old juvenile delinquent from Indiana.
Okay.
He is standing in front of a judge, facing a long sentence in a state reformatory. A local pastor intervenes and convinces the judge to offer Les an alternative. Serve your time in the brutal Indiana reform school system, or go to a disciplinary farm school run by a place called Miracle Hill in South Carolina.
And Les takes the geographic escape.
Naturally. And arriving at Miracle Hill doesn't magically fix him. He has to engage in the grueling manual labor of the farm. He has to submit to authority for the first time in his life. The process is slow.
Very slow.
But the trajectory shifts. He completes the program, begins attending night school, audits advanced seminars he can't even afford to formally enroll in. And 28 years after standing before that judge as a delinquent, Les Kimbrell earns his professional license as a landscape architect.
That is the mud poultice right there.
Yeah.
A 28-year timeline from delinquent to architect.
But the most visceral, almost unbelievable example of the messiness of this transformation is the story of a man the text simply calls Red.
Oh, Red's story is incredible.
Red is terrifying. He is a career brawler. He freely admits to the staff that he has killed 2 men in his lifetime.
2 men.
Yeah, one man who was abusing his sister and another man who attempted to rob him while they were hitchhiking. He is a man who has survived his entire life by extracting respect from others through the threat of extreme physical violence.
So Red arrives at the mission in his 60s. His body is beginning to fail. He has emphysema. He is losing the physical strength that allowed him to dominate his environment, and he is terrified of losing his status. Reid Lehman, who is only 27 years old at the time, decides to engage this double murderer in a one-on-one weekly Bible study.
Reid sits down with him and asks a baseline diagnostic question. He says, "Red, are you a Christian?"
And what does Red say?
Red looks at him with total sincerity and says, "Oh yes, I'm a Christian. I'm a Baptist. I've always been a Christian."
Oh, wow.
It is an astonishing display of cognitive dissonance given his lethal resume. So Reid starts walking him through the Gospel of Matthew, verse by verse.
And does it work?
8 weeks into this process, the text states that Red experiences a genuine, profound spiritual conversion. He repents. He surrenders his life.
But this is where the mud poultice theology becomes critical. Red is spiritually saved, but his nervous system is still programmed for combat.
Right.
Shortly after his conversion, a violently intoxicated man wanders onto the Miracle Hill property and begins aggressively cursing at the mission staff.
Yeah.
Red's lifelong protocol for dealing with disrespect kicks in instantly. He approaches the drunk man and delivers a punch with such staggering kinetic force that eyewitnesses swore the man's body lifted horizontally off the ground before crashing into the pavement.
The impact was so severe that the drunk man's teeth sank deeply into Red's knuckles, giving Red a severe case of blood poisoning.
Wow.
Reid has to pull this newly minted Christian aside and explain, "Red, the creator of the universe does not require you to defend his honor with a right hook."
He's still learning the basics.
The theological education is happening in real time amidst the chaos. A few weeks later, Red shows up to his Bible study and proudly slaps a crisp $20 bill onto the table as a tithe to the ministry.
Okay, progress. But wait, Reid is suspicious, right?
Very. He asks about the origin of the funds. Red cheerfully explains that he won the money the previous night illegally betting on football games.
Oh, no.
But, he notes, his new conscience bothered him about the gambling, so he decided to launder the illicit winnings by donating them to God.
It is hilarious, but it's also incredibly profound. You are watching a man with a fundamentally broken moral compass try to recalibrate it while the needle is spinning wildly.
Exactly. And Red seems to be stabilizing. He stops fighting. He starts driving a delivery truck for the mission's thrift store. He's managing a boarding house. He is a success story.
Until he isn't.
Right. The gravity of lifelong addiction is relentless. Red suffers a catastrophic relapse. He begins drinking heavily again.
And Miracle Hill has strict operational boundaries to protect the other clients, so Red is formally terminated from his positions and asked to leave the property for a mandatory 30-day cooling-off period.
This is the moment where Reid's ego takes over. Reid is absolutely furious. He feels personally betrayed.
Why betrayed?
He has invested countless hours into this man, defended him, discipled him, and Red throws it all away for a bottle. Reid effectively writes Red off entirely, assuming he will just bounce between seedy motels and shelters until his liver fails.
Lehman's self-reflection here is really vital for anyone in leadership. He dissects his own anger and realizes his fury wasn't actually about Red's spiritual health, it was about Reid's ego.
Oh, totally.
Reid wanted the personal dopamine hit of a success story. He wanted to be the savior who tamed the double murderer. When Red relapsed, he embarrassed Reid.
Lehman had to learn the painful lesson that his job was merely to apply the mud. The healing timeline belonged entirely to God.
And God's timeline for Red was far from over. After Red sobers up from his relapse, he doesn't return to Miracle Hill. Instead, he walks into the Salvation Army facility in Greenville.
And at the Salvation Army, the mud poultice finally clears the vision.
Really?
Red thrives. He takes over driving the truck for their thrift operations. He uses the deep theological knowledge he gained from his Bible studies with Reid to absolutely dominate the Salvation Army's Wednesday night trivia contests.
That's amazing.
He becomes a fixture of the organization. He works for the Salvation Army faithfully for 15 years.
15 years.
He oversees their entire thrift logistics, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars to fund their rehabilitation programs. He becomes a pillar of stability.
What a turnaround.
In a beautiful twist of fate, this former brawler even helps deliver his own granddaughter, Megan, on a bathroom floor during a medical emergency and spends the final years of his life peacefully raising her.
Wow.
When Red finally passes away at the age of 64, his funeral is packed with men who looked up to him as a paragon of accountability.
The psychological resolution of Red's life is just beautiful. Why was Red originally violent? Because he craved respect and feared vulnerability.
Yeah.
God didn't destroy Red's desire for respect. He redeemed the mechanism. God gave Red 15 years of honorable, grueling labor at the Salvation Army, allowing him to earn the deep, enduring respect of hundreds of men, not through fear, but through faithful service.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground. We've looked at the terrifying Elisha succession, the mustard sandwiches of the 1950s, the integration of the strange monastery, the poverty experiments in Savannah, the 13-year delay of an $829,000 trust fund, and the messy, levitating punch salvation of a double murderer.
It's a lot to process.
To synthesize all of this, we have to ask the fundamental question: why? Why does an organization like Miracle Hill seem to experience such a high density of tangible, statistically improbable miracles compared to an average, well-funded suburban nonprofit?
So what does all this mean? Well, in the final chapters of the text, Lehman offers a linguistic and theological framework that serves as the Rosetta Stone for the entire book.
Okay, what is it?
He examines the specific New Testament Greek word most frequently translated into English as poor, the word pikojos. He notes that the etymological root of this word does not primarily mean lacking money. The root word literally means to crouch or to cower.
Oh, interesting.
He applies this specifically to the imagery of a beast of burden.
Yeah.
Picture a camel in the ancient Near East. The camel is down on its knees, and its owner begins loading cargo onto its back. But the owner miscalculates and stacks an impossible amount of weight onto the animal. The load becomes so immensely heavy that the camel is physically pinned to the dirt.
It can't move.
It cannot stand up. It is trapped in a crouching position. If someone from the outside does not intervene and physically remove the weight, that camel will eventually die in the dust.
That imagery perfectly encapsulates the operational reality of a rescue mission.
It really does. But Lehman takes the metaphor further to critique modern philanthropic philosophy. Society is obsessed with means-testing compassion.
What do you mean by that?
We want to interrogate the camel before we help it. We stand over the crushed animal and ask, did you pack this load yourself? Is it your fault you were addicted to heroin? Did you make the poor choices that sent you to prison? Or is this load the result of systemic injustice and generational trauma? We want to separate the worthy poor from the unworthy poor.
Ah, I see. But the genius of Lehman's theology is that the origin of the load is entirely irrelevant to the camel's survival.
That's exactly.
The camel is dying. It doesn't matter if the camel greedily took on too much cargo or if a cruel master forced it onto its back. The physical reality remains identical. It is pinned to the earth and cannot save itself.
Lehman argues that God's intervention does not differentiate based on the source of the trauma. It responds to the severity of the entrapment.
And because organizations like Miracle Hill intentionally position themselves directly in the center of this specific demographic, dealing exclusively with men and women who are pinned to the dirt by fatal loads of addiction, mental illness, and poverty, they are operating in what Lehman calls fertile ground for divine intervention.
Right. The high density of miracles isn't because they discovered a secret prayer formula. It is simply a byproduct of their proximity to absolute desperation.
Yeah.
When human ingenuity is mathematically insufficient to lift the load, divine intervention becomes the only viable mechanism for survival.
But Lehman attaches a massive caveat to this dynamic.
Which is,
you cannot operate in that fertile ground with a sense of moral superiority. You cannot walk up to a crushed, addicted camel and start quoting pious scriptures if you are secretly hiding your own crushing load. The primary requirement for the staff attempting to lift these burdens is absolute transparency regarding their own brokenness.
it connects perfectly back to the Elisha complex we discussed at the beginning.
Right.
Elisha had to admit he was powerless without the God of Elijah. The leaders of Miracle Hill had to admit they were powerless without the rain parting or the Mrs. Smith Trust Fund clearing.
So when you strip away the institutional ego and you combine a self-sacrificial staff with an environment of impossible desperation, you create the exact atmospheric conditions required for a miracle to occur.
It is a profound challenge to how we measure success and manage risk. We want the clean predictability of an engineering timeline. But the evidence suggests the real work only happens when you are willing to get into the mud.
So true.
I want to leave our listeners with one final, deeply practical reflection drawn from the text.
Let's hear it.
Lehman highlights a man named Billy Odom, a counsel who possessed a fascinating psychological trait. He actively looked for the fingerprints of God in the most mundane, frustrating interruptions of his daily routine.
Like getting stuck in traffic.
Exactly. If a tire blew out or a meeting was delayed, he didn't view it as a failure of his schedule. He viewed it as a potential pivot orchestrated by a higher intelligence.
Oh, wow. It forces you to look at the chaos of your own life differently.
Definitely. Are the unexpected hiccups you're facing right now, the denied loan applications, the difficult employee, the strategic plan that just fell apart, are they actually failures?
Or are they the ticking of a completely different watch? Are you so hyper-focused on forcing your own timeline to succeed that you are completely blind to the miraculous intervention that is being constructed inside the delay?
The timeline of the provision is rarely our own. 13 years for a trust fund to clear, 28 years to become an architect, a lifetime to find respect without violence.
The watch is ticking, but we don't own it. Keep learning, keep asking the hard questions, and keep diving deep.